More than $80 million in grants has been announced to improve highway safety, including better access to truck parking. Today, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration announced that this funding will help reduce the frequency and severity of commercial motor vehicle crashes. FMCSA says it will also support truck drivers by expanding access to truck parking, investing in critical technology, improving safety in work zones, rural areas, and high crash corridors, and more. At an event yesterday in South Dakota, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg spoke about the funding.
We're announcing over $80 million in grants to improve highway safety, including access to truck around the country through FMCSA. And that's alongside investments that we have already made that include $23 million in Texas, where we've got a new truck parking plaza with fencing, restrooms, and showers in Caldwell County. We got $15 million headed to I-4 between Tampa and Orlando. We get 120 new trucks with parking spaces there. $10 million for a truck parking facility in Caldwell Parish in Louisiana, which includes charging stations that can power the heating and cooling system, so less idling, which also saves truck drivers money. And much more where that came from. And the most important part of all of this, again, just like the most important part of our supply chains, is the people we count. One of the best parts of my job.
The high priority grants include a 65% increase in funding for truck parking projects over last year and enhance critical efforts to support truck drivers and improve safety.
Multiple signs spanning many miles along northbound Interstate 29 from OOIDA headquarters in Grain Valley, Missouri, were a consistent reminder to Association President Todd Spencer of the reason he was heading up to Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Not that he needs a reminder, because Spencer has known about and has been trying to do something about the truck parking crisis for decades now. And it remains at the front of his mind this day as he heads to South Dakota for an event hosted by the U.S. Department of Transportation in celebration of expanded truck parking at a rest area off Interstate 90 in Salem. Behind the wheel of the OOIDA tour truck, the Spirit of the American Trucker, Spencer points out which parking areas are full, which ones are not, and which ones are former scale houses converted into parking, much like Missouri did at the urging of OOIDA years ago. He drives past signs that read minimal truck parking ahead, and at the end of his trip to Sioux Falls, points out that the Loves off Interstate 90 doesn't appear to have a single one of its 85 truck parking spots available just before 7 p.m. on a Monday evening. But it's a bit easier now to find a spot just outside of South Dakota's biggest city. Thanks to a federal grant program, about a dozen additional truck parking spaces were just added to the two I-90 rest areas in Salem. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, during a news conference, noted how busy that stretch of highway is.
This is a highway that was built more than half a century ago. And that means that the pavement, the bridges, the other structures are often beyond their useful life and very much in need of being updated. And this highway stretch in particular needs attention because it's one of the most dangerous in the state. Nearly 500 crashes in 5 years.
The secretary was the last to speak at the news conference following Spencer, other industry leaders, and Robin Hutchison, administrator of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration.
We always want to start and kick off by saying thank you so much for what you did in the hard times and what you do day in and day out for the American people. And today we celebrate you by delivering for you. We've heard from you, since we started in these jobs, and we heard from you again today. And we heard from you, as both the secretary and I have taken an opportunity to ride along with drivers, that parking is a top concern.
The news conference capped off a full morning at the Salem rest area. Buttigieg and Hutchison started things off with two meet and greets, first with half a dozen industry leaders, including Spencer, all reinforcing how bad the truck parking crisis is, and then with several working truckers hammering that point home once more. Spencer, who sat directly across from Secretary Buttigieg during their meet and greet, said the secretary made it perfectly clear during their talk that he's aware of problems like truck parking that are running truckers out of the industry.
Well, certainly what it was clear from the conversations that with the Secretary of Transportation and the rest of us sitting there is that he is fully aware of many of the big issues for truckers. I mean, detention, pay, some of the rip-off agreements that folks get stuck into, certainly aware of the problem with detention and is determined to certainly elevate those issues to the point of discussion where we create an opportunity to actually act on them, to do something, to remedy some of these situations.
Buttigieg at the news conference later acknowledging that the issue is a priority for him.
There are many other ways that the lack of truck parking is dangerous. Other drivers are more likely to crash into a truck parked on the side of the road. Most highway shoulders aren't designed for heavy vehicles to be parked there for hours at a time, meaning that they take damage, and it makes the whole roadway less safe for anybody who uses it. And of course, knowing the importance of rest in the first place, if truckers can't find a safe and restful place to rest, then driver fatigue comes into play, and it is fatigue that causes the majority of fatal truck crashes every year. And yet 98% of drivers report that they haven't been able to find safe truck parking, which costs them time and money. It makes our roads less safe, and it's weakening our supply chains. So that's why we have put such a focus on this urgent problem. And that's why we've taken the actions that we have taken.
The expansion in Salem, South Dakota is the latest in a string of similar projects throughout the country. The USDOT has grant money being used in Louisiana, Texas, Florida, and other states specifically for truck parking projects. The secretary also announcing during the news conference that more money is on the way. $80 million, in fact, for infrastructure projects, including truck parking. There's no doubt that all are needed because the truck parking crisis spans far and wide throughout the U.S., and it touches other issues as well. OOIDA Life member Carmen Anderson, a Sioux Falls native who introduced the secretary during Tuesday's news conference, also had a chance to bend his ear during the meet and greet, an opportunity she used to bring up the problem of bathroom access. Afterward, with me, she explained why.
That is a pet peeve of mine on that, the porta potties, how they're just, since COVID, they've just kind of shoved us out and said, no, we don't have access to the regular bathrooms. And like I said, I was in Florida last week in Jacksonville, and it was 93 degrees, and they expect us to go out there or up here at 10 below. It just is not feasible.
Other drivers who call South Dakota home say the extra dozen parking spots at this rest area help. They don't dispute that, but drivers like OOIDA Life member Jerry Seaman see the problem in a different light. He brought up his concerns as well directly to Buttigieg and Hutchison.
That it's all right to have these deals where they're opening them, but on the other side, we're seeing them close them. And it's issues that I think that could be straightened out easily. So we don't spend all this money there because the concrete and stuff is there for those parking places. We just got to figure out places and ways to get rid of the human waste so we don't close them because the concrete's there. The good place to park is there. If we get lights and we get toilets there, to me, they're safe enough. They pass the criteria for me and for a lot of the other truck drivers I know, whether they're women or men.
Owner-operator Flo Hare, a citizen of the Yankton Sioux tribe, mentioned a problem every long-haul trucker can relate to, having to park in areas she doesn't feel safe.
Yes, a lot of the time I do. And not only safe for myself, my body as a woman, but safe as for my equipment. Sometimes I have to park on the side, I'd not prefer to, but on an on-ramp or off-ramp, and you have trucks going by 70, 80 miles per hour, and they're inches, literally inches, whizzing by your truck, and you're trying to get some rest in your truck.
That's one safety aspect, the threat of parking on an off or on ramp and taking your chances. There's also the threat of violence. It's a point Buttigieg made during his speech to those who gathered for Tuesday's event, referencing Jason's Law in particular, making it clear that the truck parking issue is above all else a safety issue.
But what's especially troubling is that the details surrounding that case are very familiar to thousands of American truckers. What happened to Jason Rivenberg was he was running ahead of schedule, and he wasn't permitted to arrive at the delivery site until an hour before the designated time, which meant he had to come up with a place to park overnight. And there were not any good options around it. So he chose an abandoned gas station, not because that was an appealing place, but because that was his only choice. And almost every driver in America is in a situation like that, including some of the drivers I was talking to today.
Bob Willey, chairman of the board for the South Dakota Trucking Association and life member of OOIDA, who also hauls livestock and ag commodities, was among the half-dozen industry leaders who met with Buttigieg and Hutchison on Tuesday. He told me that he's had close calls as well.
It's a major deal. I pulled into Grand Island one night at 2:30 in the morning and couldn't find a place to park, and that is a big place and stuff there. So in one instance there, this has been quite a few years ago, but I was in San Antonio, Texas, and I pulled into the place, light to set where I got to unload in the morning. And I get up in the morning there, and they start moving around a little before 8 there, and they said, well, what time this morning did you get here? So I got here at 10:30 last night, and deadpan look, they were serious. You're still alive? And that's the issues that our drivers got to face on a daily basis. Some of them end up parking in places that aren't safe, and that's the reason you hear about the stories of somebody getting shot, somebody getting robbed.
All the professional truck drivers I spoke with at the event acknowledged that the expansions taking place throughout the country are going to help, but all also acknowledged that it's going to take a long time to resolve the crisis. Flo Hare, the long-haul trucker, believes it's time for accountability.
I think accountability. Drivers are held accountable by having to do their physicals, and carriers are being held accountable. Their equipment has to come into, inspections, and anytime we can get pulled over and be held accountable. Well, how come the states, counties, the government, how come they're not being held accountable by providing safe parking for us? So accountability, let's step it up.
Spencer understands why truckers are frustrated with the slow pace of progress, but he's also hopeful.
It is being addressed because, one, the administration recognized it as something that elevated it in their priority with them. They recognized a need and used the tools that were available to them to actually make progress in this area. And when I say the tools, they can offer grants and things like that for making improvements, but the bigger issue basically requires Congress to step up and actually specifically earmark money, federal money, for parking. Let's get to going. There's no excuse for blowing all the serious stuff off.
That's also something Secretary Buttigieg said on Tuesday. This is just the start, he said. Following the news conference, I got a chance to speak with the secretary in the shadow of the OOIDA tour truck. I started by asking him if he'd learned anything from the 2 meet and greets he was part of.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, how we can continue to make sure that we have not just quantity but quality when it comes to truck parking spaces, that they not only need to be there, but they need to be safe. I also see a lot of opportunity in getting better information about when they're going to be available. I was talking to some of the drivers about the apps that they're using, trying to just know what to expect. And I think there's some steps we could take. There may be some technologies we can invest in alongside the physical paving that we're doing that could all be part of the solution. So a lot about that, a lot about just how much passion and pride there is for the career too, though, and that's something that's contagious and really motivates me to make sure our department continues to be here for not just the industry, but most importantly, the men and women who power it.
One thing that was brought up there, and obviously getting more women into the industry, I know is a priority as well. They talked about porta potties and how bad restroom access still is, and it goes hand in hand with truck parking, as you've kind of mentioned here. But can you talk a little bit about the priority that has become as well, getting more restroom access for drivers out on the road? That's a huge issue.
It's just such a fundamental thing. I mean, who would agree to work at any other workplace, an office, for example, where you couldn't use the restroom? It's a basic part of being able to do a job. And, when you think about drivers who experience infrastructure as their workplace and, in a way, as their home, we need to make sure that we take care of the basics. And so that is something we're going to continue looking at and pushing on, whether it's issues that we have a direct hand in, like the availability of rest stops, or talking about why we see drivers turned away from facilities when they're making deliveries of shipments, where they would benefit from being able to access those restrooms.
Momentum. So obviously this makes a huge difference to the people who frequent I-90 here back and forth. Obviously this is a huge issue right now. I mean, it's a big scale problem, as you are well aware. What do you think it's going to take to get the momentum to get us down the path that really gets us moving on this, and we actually make a huge or a bigger dent, I suppose, in the problem?
I think the great news is we have changed the trajectory. It's gone from getting worse each passing year to getting better. Now we need to make it get better faster. And that means making sure that states understand that they can use formula dollars to improve truck parking and other related things that are going to make drivers better off. It means ensuring there's more funding where that came from. Very important to me right now that all this talk about shutting down the government, that folks just remember how many livelihoods are disrupted when you stop us in our tracks in important work that we're doing. And making sure that we find new directions that are going to make a difference, like technology, to help make better use of the resources that are already out there.
Our thanks to Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg for his time.